sustaining an ethical metaverse, physically, spiritually, and mentally doing no harm in Web3.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for taking the time. I am Jean-Michel, TLDR, seen Bitcoin since it was $100, and here we are today having a fucking conversation about it. That's a little bit about me. Guys, 30-second intros.
Hello, testing. Hi, everyone. Michael here from Metaverse Architects. We're a 3D studio that specializes in building metaverse spaces. On to you, Ty.
My name is Taylor Freeman, co-founder of Axon Park. We are building an interactive 3D education platform that you could argue is in the metaverse, and happy to be here.
Thank you so much, guys. So, I want the focus of this panel to be ethics, and the reason why is that I believe, at least, that one of the key differentiators between Web3 projects that die in a few years and the ones that stick around for a long period of time, essentially their main differentiator is ethics, right? If you think about everyone who's raised money in 2017 and is still around today, the only reason they didn't rug pull is because ethics is important to them, right? So I want to sort of apply that to the context of the metaverse. So we'll start, I think this is a bit of a question for the both of you, right? So what specific ethical challenges do you see in the metaverse, especially in the context of children, for example?
I mean, I can jump on that. So as you mentioned, I think intention is the key thing, right? So if you intend to do a good job, you intend to build a good product, you intend to keep people safe, then that's much more likely to happen versus saying, how can we make as much money as possible and ride this trend? And I think there's obviously a blend between those for a lot of people, but that is really the key thing. So when you think about applications like Roblox, or if anyone's familiar with VR Chat, which is kind of like a social virtual platform, there's actually a really huge issue with grooming. So adults basically faking their age and like building these inappropriate relationships with kids. And there's very little protective mechanisms in place on these platforms to actually do proper age verification and create safe spaces. And then especially if you look at platforms like VR Chat, where you can upload any avatar, including not safe for work avatars, and there's no real protection. Like a kid who's 8 years old could like stumble into one of these worlds with a bunch of naked avatars doing whatever they're doing, right?
Teabagging.
Likely, yeah. So I think it's really like from a ground floor, now that we're seeing the negative effects of this in platforms, having really good age verification, having clear silos of age appropriate content, and also creating, I think a big thing actually is creating an onboarding flow for new users that's a little bit more intentionally created. Because for example, in VR Chat, you just like flow into the center hub space and it's just chaos. And everyone that goes in there, immediately they're getting harassed, they're getting the racial slurs. It's just chaos. So I think thoughtful onboarding into platforms is also very important.
Yeah. So okay. So it's intent and onboarding. Michael?
I would say it's very dependent on the initial design of the infrastructure. So effectively, you can have spaces which are gated, which are linked to an identity wallet, which is linked to an age, right? Most of the spaces don't have it yet, and that's questionable. But I think if we want to take it to the next step and have a good level of baseline morality and ethics, baseline infrastructure and security.
Okay, so let's sort of talk about that in real terms, right? And I think using the example specifically, which Taylor just mentioned. So grooming is a real problem in something like Roblox, right? Why? Because you definitely wouldn't trust like me to spend time with your 5-year-old kid in a playground if we've never met, right? But you trust basically everyone else around the world who has a phone or a PlayStation or whatever the hell it is. So some of the methods which are being used at the moment include sort of things like calculating the number of actions per minute, right? And the sort of typing rate. So obviously, like a fully grown adult has much larger, a much larger hands, so you can type a lot more words per minute. And kids obviously can't reach that same sort of thresholds, right? But that's just one sort of security measure. Age walling is another. But what other measures do you see that can be implemented, and what are the problems with them? Like, how do we reduce fraud but still keep the gaming experience smooth? I think that's the key question here, no?
That's delicate. I guess one element could be to introduce what you can refer to as on-the-ground police or wardens roaming the spaces, ensuring that it's a safe space. But that is quite manual. You could have auto-GPT agents doing something like that, but then that is very structured. So in the matters of gray areas, you're either banned or not. I think it's just a blend of both, to be honest. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I think so. There are two key mechanisms that I can think of that have the biggest impact on the virtual culture within a platform. So when you look at a platform like Roblox, VR Chat, Rec Room, Second Life, Fortnite, they all have their own emergent cultures, emergent behaviors. And the two things, in the past 10 years of working on this as my full-time focus, I think the two most powerful mechanisms are whether or not you can be anonymous or you're tied to real-world identity. So you imagine a platform where you're validating the authenticity with LinkedIn, for example. It's not perfect, right? But you're attached to a real identity versus crazy guy 125, right? So then that's one. The second thing that I believe is the most powerful for culture is the avatar system. So if, like VR Chat, you have flexibility to upload any avatar, including inappropriate avatars, that is, from what I've seen, the most powerful mechanism for changing and shifting the culture versus having preset avatars where you're kind of customizing from a couple options. So yeah, it's those two.
That's a really interesting mechanism, actually. So like what you're saying is, rather than having a set amount of, let's say, like head icons or whatever, you'd manually and actively contribute to this avatar in some way, and that makes it somewhat unique. To Michael's point, I think the idea of having a sort of like metaverse police officer is kind of unique, right? It's like the only previous example I can potentially think of that comes even close would be like a game master in World of Warcraft, right? They'd just be walking around. You just think they're a player. You type something or whatever, and then 2 minutes later, you've been logged out of World of Warcraft.
You get a fine.
With a fine, or you've been banned for 2 weeks or whatever, and then you have to go and explore the outside world, which nobody wants to do that. But no, kidding. Okay, so these are the sort of security, I guess, mechanisms which can be implemented. What are your other concerns as far as, like how do we build ethical spaces for not just kids, right? But let's say people. Let's say we're dealing with I don't know. I'll give you an example. I think a metaverse, let's say something like VR Chat, if you had a private chat room, would be a really useful environment for, let's say, people with autism to sort of meet amongst each other and chat, for example. So like one of my main concerns there would be how do we get someone to stop abusing it? Now you said before, if it's anonymous and it's you're gonna have some kind of abuse by default, but isn't there some kind of solution to this?
So one thing because we think a lot about this with our platform, which is like, if people again are familiar with VR Chat, we're building something that's kind of like VR Chat, but all for education. So this is a huge thing because people could just walk up and start putting their hands in someone's face and yelling at them. And so we're actually exploring a solution from a company called GGWP, I think is the acronym.
Good game, well played.
Yeah. So basically they have an anti-toxicity platform that's actually very easy to integrate through an API where you can funnel all the text data, the username data, and we're working in a beta with them on like a voice chat system, which then you get into this sort of like Orwellian surveillance state. So like anyone using the platform, in their world. They don't know it, but all the audio is being analyzed in real time. Of course, it's in the terms of service. It's clear,
Sure.
but it's not affecting their environment until they start doing something. And it has amazing features like anti-bullying, right? So if you're in a group of 3 or 4 students working together, and 2 or 3 of them start ganging up on the other one, our system will start recognizing that there's bullying happening, and it will flag that, and it can either intervene, and there could be a pop-up that says, please be respectful, there's a space for everyone, or we get a report on the back end that says these users are being very problematic.
So let's take this example, right? Let's say you're creating educational rooms for kids to learn stuff online, right? What would be considered, I would argue, what would be considered bullying in one country might be something completely normal in a different country, right? Because it's a question of culture at the end of the day, right? You know how it is. If like some things affect people in different ways. So is there some way to automate that kind of problem, or how would you get, or rather, let me phrase the question differently. What sort of input would you get from the customer to be able to ensure that the terms of use of that specific education room are acceptable both to them and to the law at large, I guess?
I mean, that's a classic ethics debate question, right? But for me, it just boils down to intention. And also, if someone is feeling, right, their own world, but in their world, if they're feeling like you're attacking them, if they're feeling put down, if they have that negative energy aimed toward them, if they're feeling that, then that's an indication, right? So some cultures may not feel that, some cultures may. So it's very nuanced. And like a system like GGWP can basically, you can choose, do you want something that's aggressively intervening, blocking them, muting them? And then who decides where the line is? It's basically, I think they're using just like ChatGPT on the back end, right? Or maybe Llama 2 at this point, but.
Michael?
I think it's actually more simple. I mean, for me, hate speech is hate speech around the world. So you can have a system whereby you're tracking certain words and that results in a ban, just like on Facebook, etc. And effectively, we have seen many cases whereby social media hate speech has resulted in fines issued by local authorities.
So let me tell you why you're wrong. It's a really, really common thing to say in Malta, right? Like the really, really common phrase, all right, yo. Super, super common, okay? When you type that out, that's all right, Jew. And I've been banned for saying that. For saying that. Because it's a blanket. I didn't mean anything by it, right? But it was interpreted by a model that classifies that as hate speech. And then you get, like Taylor said, this sort of Orwellian society where, one blanket tries to solve all the problems. And this is one example I'm thinking about on the top of my head. You know what I mean?
That's why then it goes into dispute, which is manual. So there'll be a team that would analyze that. It's unfortunate you were banned. I mean, for next time. But English is the international language, so I don't know how you'll stop some older woman from a Maltese locality, not to say that, but it's the reality we're facing.
You know what I mean?
I don't know. It's interesting.
This is just one example with one specific culture's relationship with another language, right? As soon as you start to add, LATAM and the East and all those different possible variables, right? Even just, let's say, definitions of acronyms, right? Like the same acronym can be hate speech and it can also be something completely different because it has multiple meanings. So and I think moderating this at a blanket level would be a bit of a tragedy. But to your point, it might be an idea to have the individual client then be the one who's responsible for all of the reports and complaints, right? And that way you have a bit of a hybrid approach on the...
Or a governance structure, a metaverse governance structure.
Say more words.
I mean, I see it the same way as a normal governance structure would run a country, right? It's just a virtual economy. So unbiased professional people whose role is to ensure the democracy or ethical values that are being transcribed in the real world are the same in the virtual world, and they're obviously paid a salary as a non-profit.
That's an interesting concept.
We should open one.
Most definitely. I'll take a cut, by the way. And Taylor, what's your thoughts?
I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I also, because I approach a lot of this from a design platform building perspective, I always like to think of the design components that affect this. And like, when you look at how Meta, Facebook, built Horizon, their social VR chat equivalent, they have like the most aggressive self-reporting and also self-protection systems where you can basically hold down a button and the world freezes. So if someone comes up to you and they're like harassing you, which happens a lot in social VR, unfortunately, you can literally hold a button, the whole world freezes. So they're frozen in space. You can point at them and then literally just delete them from your reality. And then they're hidden. So if there are other people, they can hear that person and they're like talking to nothing.
Wow.
But you can't see each other. And it's just this weird sort of intermediate solution. The other one is like space bubbles. So if someone gets too close to you, they just fade out and disappear. So like there are these mechanisms that you can use to kind of do that. And then you can also self-report. So if someone's causing problems, you make it easy for the user without the other person knowing that they're being reported to just say like, I'm feeling, this is inappropriate.
Yeah. Michael, I'm seeing you nod your head there.
I think it's crazy to have a system whereby you can just cancel someone out of a virtual space. I think of it very simply. What applies in the real world should apply in the virtual world. You can't cancel someone like that because they annoy you.
I mean, from an ethical perspective in the real world, I entirely agree with you. I think what's beautiful about a VR experience is it creates different realities which allow you to shape very specific experiences. So for example, there's a little experiment done by the University of Malta. I believe it's, I want to say Alexei Dingley's project, where they use VR for kids who are afraid of needles, right? So they stick this headset on them, and there's this game that they play by following your sort of head, just to get you to ignore the fact that there's a needle in your arm. To be honest, I'm not a kid, but I'd probably be a user, most definitely. So it's okay for us to use VR to negate parts of the real world we don't like if it's for the greater benefit. At the same time, on the other side, there's the censorship issue. So I completely hear you, right? But wouldn't this idea of a chat bubble? Because think about it like this. Don't think about you. Think about your 6-year-old cousin, right? I'm trying on this VR set, and there's three kids who are 14, 15, and they're around you, they're in front of you. All you can see is just people, right? It's like you might have that ability to say, okay, whatever, it's fine, whatever, it's cool. But wouldn't something like that be great for kids or even like elderly people? No, think about like a 70-year-old using VR. Wouldn't that be somewhat useful in that case? Feel free to disagree, by the way, huh? Feel free.
I agree, but I think the solution would be just to have specific private rooms for specific demographics. So
yes,
effectively, you're talking about a centralized space where everyone's sharing the resources, but then you can have private spaces.
Yes,
that's what I think about.
So general rules and specific rules is what you mean.
It's general and then specific based on.
Okay, so let's talk about a specific use case, and let's try and see if we can sort of figure out what these rules should be on the fly, right? So let's say the world becomes a really good place, and we decide to use Taylor's platform to connect orphanages with elderly homes, right? Amazing. Why? Because those old people are really lonely, and they those people, in my opinion, usually have the coolest stories in the world, right? Because they've been around on this fucking planet for the longest. And those kids are really lonely and need some guidance, and it's a sort of match made in heaven, with the exception of the fact that any one of those grandpas or grandmas could have ill intent, right? So let's say we're talking about using a Taylor solution to sort of bring these guys together. Now we're going to have a main space and we're going to have private spaces, essentially. What should the rules be on either side? And what questions would you ask to figure out what those answers should be?
That's quite a nuanced question. I'll do my best. I think, again, it goes back to the intention. If everyone is treating everyone with respect, if everyone feels included and not discriminated against or attacked, that's the foundation. And I'll also add another element, which is, as human beings, we exist in this world exposed to so much media, so many different ideas, and like these ideas shape our perceptions, right? And like media shapes the way that we see certain demographics of people. So in your example, like ageism as a concept, like I used to be in Silicon Valley, and like that was a huge thing in Silicon Valley, is like being too old for a startup and being discriminated against because you were too old, which at the same time is like you have the most experience. So that doesn't make sense. But these biases, people aren't intentionally trying to be biased, right? They have an immediate reaction, like level 1, level 2 thinking, or type 1, type 2 thinking, like Kahneman. So people just react. And in virtual spaces, you can actually account for a lot of these implicit biases. So rather than seeing the human there who might immediately trigger a number of biases for you, you see an avatar, you have a sort of more control over this environment. It's more of a level playing field, especially if people are not able-bodied. You know, if someone is wheelchair bound in a virtual space, they don't have to disclose that if they don't wish to, right? They can just be on the same level as everyone else. There's no prejudice, there's no judgment. So it's tremendously freeing, actually. And like you see a lot of people actually using these virtual spaces to prototype their identity in real life. And this is like a thing, like prototyping your identity. And they'll learn, wow, you know, I'm actually gay, or I want to have purple hair, and this makes me feel great. And like these virtual platforms are actually so powerful for helping people to discover these things and feel comfortable to do this. So again, it's like the framing of the avatar, the design decisions, whether or not you're being monitored, all of this really plays into the culture a lot.
Michael, any thoughts?
You said it perfectly, to be honest.
Super. Last question from my end, guys, which is, if you had to see one specific use case in the metaverse come to life within the next 5 years, what would it be and why?
I mean, I'm super biased, but education. I think with the convergence of these interactive 3D platforms, with the large language models, we can provide interactive, personalized education in pretty much any language immediately to any student. And that is a profound shift, right? Like you imagine doing your homework, you go home, you've got a piece of paper, you're doing a math equation. You don't know if you did it right. You don't know if you did it wrong. You have questions. Maybe your parents don't know. Maybe your parents aren't there. But we're shifting into this space where you can basically get any answer to any question and have an experience that utilizes the game mechanics that are so addicting for these kids, like Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite. They'll spend 4 hours without even thinking playing those games, but to get someone to do 15 minutes of math homework is like pulling teeth, right? So I believe that there's actually a really beautiful shift where learning can be fun and engaging and meet the student where they are. And that just will have profound impacts, hopefully, for society as a whole.
Absolutely.
It's up there. I would say commercial transactions. So retail, product-based stuff which is tangible, which might be a bit difficult to access, or due to the speed of life seen as maybe unnecessary, which will turn into an easy accessible product and effectively a purchase. That's how I look at it.
Can you give me an example of a specific product which would benefit of being sold in the metaverse versus a website or in store?
I would say retail. So clothing, the returns on clothing is very, very high. I mean, the time, if you take the opportunity cost of returning an item globally, is massive. It helps everyone. But the hardware has to develop in tandem.
Exactly. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. Everyone here, thank you so much for your
Thanks.
time, and have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you.
I wanted to jump in with some questions, if you don't mind. I actually wanted to ask about the kids and the game addiction thing, because this is very relevant for every parent out there, I guess. But Axon already... Oh, sorry. Axon. Taylor.
It's Axon.
New name alert. So Taylor already answered that one. Right. So I also wanted to ask if you know about, because one of our topics was spirituality and mentality. Do you know of any tools that are used for spiritual practices or religious practices? Because these are very particular communities, right? And I cannot imagine a religious community maybe using some Web3 tools or Metaverse. Are you aware of any examples?
So on the religious side, I won't comment. Let's just say that. But what I can tell you is there are a couple of different meditation apps that you can download, which are awesome. They're really, really cool. And if you want to be a little bit more exotic, there's virtual ayahuasca trips, which you can try in VR.
Wow.
Which is really fun.
That is dangerous.
Really,
More than
really
fun.
Speaking from
as far as I know.
experience.
Yes, virtual
Wow.
ayahuasca experience.
Yeah.
Virtual. Oh, okay. That's tough. All right.
Guys, any other
comments?
Any other examples?
I mean, you mentioned the meditation apps that are quite nice. There was actually in Alt Space, which is another virtual platform like VR Chat and stuff, there was the VR church. And every Sunday, people would meet in this VR church, and it became like huge. I think it was one of the biggest, like regular, consistent meetups that were happening. So yeah, people can use these tools. And I think, again, getting into religion is everyone has their own views, but I think you can deliver experiences that feel very spiritual, that connect you to a deeper sense of purpose and meaning. And you can, using VR, because you can put people into any perspective, you can get to those moments maybe a little easier than in other ways. But yeah, it's a whole super interesting field.
We actually had built a mental health clinic. It was led by Aaron, who's right there. Hi, Aaron. It was amazing. I remember him telling me the design concept, focusing a lot on sound and feeling. So effectively, that's something you can replicate.
That's a really cool model. And I mean, something I'd like to see, which I think would sort of tie into the spirituality side of things, is like Alcoholics Anonymous in VR.
Yeah, I mean,
would be amazing. You know? You can basically go and have a little chat without any sort of shame because no one can see you. And that's I think the unique factor that VR delivers that you don't get anywhere else.
For introverts.
For introverts, hey, I mean that's those are the nerds who first adopt, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
One more, real quick. I'm sorry, everyone. So speaking of real life experiences in VR, do you remember what happened to Google Glass? Yeah, got banned initially. So now we have Ray-Ban X Meta.
Yeah.
Whatever there is there. So what would happen to these? Will they help or?
So those, I've actually had the first model. This is the second model, which is.
Are you wearing it?
Which is just released. No. What's nice about, if I was wearing it and I was recording, you'd see a little LED over here that blinks every time that you're recording. So that is. There's no AR there. There's no display. I remember using Google Glass in 2012, and I was amazed by the possibilities. But I think that the ethics of AR are fantastically more complicated than VR. For example, you could walk around with an AI-based nude filter that makes every person you look at butt naked, but only to you, right? That would be that's a hell of an ethical consideration, and that's just one. So I think AR is a whole can of worms that the world isn't ready for, but it will be extremely interesting once it's done.